Hey everyone, it's SuperDan from Amplify. We're here with Jimmy from Chasing Ghosts. But before I start the interview, I just want to acknowledge that I'm on Garingal land of the Eora Nation. And Jimmy, where are you tuning in from?
I'm in Lutruwita, which is the Palawakani word for Tasmania, and I'm up near what they call Kalamaluka, which is where the Three Rivers Nations meet. It's the name of the Tamar River, and which most people probably know as Lonnie or Launceston. So this is my new patch in the world, living on Palawapakana country down here in Lutruwita.
Okay, awesome. And so you're in Chasing Ghosts. How did that band begin? If you can go back to that first period.
Yeah, so I used to play in punk bands and hardcore bands and um, that sort of anything sort of heavy I was interested in as a young person and um, like when I was, a teenager, etc. And I kind of the music scene went really toxic. It was kind of really became a pretty toxic, negative kind of space, and I just bounced on it one day and I was like, I'm out. I don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. It's not punk anymore. It's not hardcore anymore. It's just an ego fest, and it was pretty negative. And that was really weird because I then had to kind of think about, okay, what do I want to do? And I really thought, oh, I'm probably not going to play music anymore, but I just wanted to write one record that was like an acoustic record that was soft, where I sung, no auto tune, all natural, old school kind of style recording. I borrowed my dad's guitar and I wrote the first Chasing Ghost record. And in my head, I thought, I'll write this record and my dad will finally like something that I wrote. Didn't work. He didn't like it anyway. But that's more for my therapist to worry about, not you so much. But I then decided, right, I'll it went quite well, and I sort of was doing this folk punk troubadour kind of like solo chasing ghosts presentation for a long time, and then the second record I enlisted Andrew from Comeback Kid, who was a friend of mine to be a producer and to produce the record. So again, we had like these. Oh, there's my baba. We had these punk hardcore guys doing like a sort of folksy rock and roll record, and I'd written so many parts that I needed band members to come in and play them, and so to present it live. And so that became sort of how Chasing Ghosts stepped out of a solo acoustic project into a band project and developed band members. And now we're on the like fourth record, and we're about to, we're embarking on this next new journey. And I still play solo as Jimmy Kyle, which is brilliant, but the band has become its own thing. So Chasing Ghosts is, you know, morphed on each record, and it's changed, and I've tried to evolve the project on each record. I've not wanted to present, four records that sound the same. I sort of grew up in an era where bands didn't generally do that. They would evolve on each record. They would try and offer the audience another incarnation of themselves. And so each Chasing Ghosts record has been this evolution and this big change, and sonically and sound wise and production wise. And our soon, our future record to be released is another example of that.
Okay, awesome. And so you said you had an interest in like acoustic, soft kind of music in the beginning, but now what do you think is like a unique feature of Chasing Ghosts? Like if you could pinpoint one thing you think stands out in the band.
Yeah, well, I think as an artist, when you start to when you've been doing it for a decade, you get these signature things that come up in your sound, and you start to collect them as your sound. And usually at the start, sometimes they're flaws, or what you might perceive as a flaw. But one is singing in an Australian accent would be one thing. Where are you? That was, well, you got to remember the generation I grew
It's
up
kind
in.
of American.
Yeah, well, that's that whole American, where are you? That kind of thing was very much what I grew up with. So to sing in an Australian accent was not as common when I was starting out, and that was one of the things that I did. And it took time to get, we grew up on American music, and so then it took time to sing as an Australian and learn how to use the vowels so they flatter the song rather than make you sort of distracted from the song. Um, and there were lots of others that did that before me. I guess another example of probably is the storytelling. Chasing Ghosts became a lot about storytelling, and it became a sort of feature of the songwriting. And um, other examples, I guess, of signature sort of Chasing Ghost sounds, that for a long time there was like heavy drumming, even if like it was often the drumming became like punk hardcore drumming or heavier sort of drumming towards maybe softer music. And the other was always a Hammond organ, a keyboard, like a very typical of a band like Alexis on Fire often had a Hammond organ in their music, and it just gives it this timelessness that lots of generations enjoy of music, and that became a feature. So because of the way the songs had been written in the early days with lots of organ and piano and things like that, I'd never been in a sort of a punk rock band that had a sixth member. It was always sort of five. And had I known that was going to cause so much financial trouble, like touring vans, flights, and like a really nice like Korg keyboard weighs about as much as a coffin, and so it's a pain in the bum to get around the country. But that became one of the signature sounds of Chasing Ghosts, and I think in the new record, uh, one of the departures, I guess, is there's no acoustic. There's very little acoustic guitar. It presents just in little snippets as a tip to the hat to the past, but it's essentially a punk rock record. And yeah, it's like it's gone full circle back to the scene I tried to leave, and then I was always like, it was always punk kids and hardcore kids and sort of metal kids that would come, and I would be like their guilty pleasure, like their soft band they listened to. So they'd all come around and to a show, and now it's just slowly gone all the way back around. And I think probably one of the things that have come out in the last couple of records is writing about less about myself and more so about probably hypersensitive issues that have to be quite delicate when you write them, and mindful when you're writing them, so you don't you represent the issue in the right way. And that's like walking a tightrope. That's very it's challenging, and that's why I did it. I remember thinking, what would I write about if I didn't care? Like if I was at the end of my career, like let's say I'm an 80-year-old person and I'm about to pass away, it's like, well, what would you say if you just had to say what you wanted to say without any filters? And that's sort of, I think, where a lot of traction in my music happened, because I started to speak on things that were important to me, but were in many cases taboo subjects to other people.
Okay, interesting. Um, so was there like regarding Amnesia, everybody, the new song, was there a
Yeah.
specific time in your life that that song was written, or was it more just you were writing naturally and then this song came about out of nowhere, or do you think it's a reflection of, I guess, specific time in your life?
Um, it's probably got a lot to do with the so when I'm not playing music, one of the things I often do is publicly speak, or I teach or do lectures on um, Aboriginal history and culture. And one of those, more so history in the last few years, which is often about what happened in Australia, and really digging down into the understanding of what massacres looked like, who led those massacres, why did they happen, were they state sanctioned massacres, or were they like vigilantes, like mobs of people leading those massacres, like pastoralists, or was it police, or was it military? And how long ago did they stop? And what was the the spread? What was the impact on people? And how does that connect us to today's lived experience that we're all experiencing today? And that sort of, I've probably trained somewhere between maybe 10 and 20,000 people. And so I've sort of been able to get into a space where that was what I was thinking about a lot of the time. I think it just permeated through my music, which is right. All right, I'm going to write this song. And one of the things as an Aboriginal person that I guess it sits with you always. It's always within. It's a lens it leaves an indelible imprint on you because it impacts every other Aboriginal person you know, as well as yourself, your own family members. It impacts your intergenerational wealth, or your ability to have grown generational wealth. That's not something many of us have had. It's a very modern thing. You've got to you've got to kind of understand that wage equality for Aboriginal people happened in 1984. This is the period, John Farnham's got a mullet and he's skinny still and he's singing You're the Voice, Try and Understand It. It's that era. That's how recent we're talking. So
Yeah.
I think a lot of people think that these things happened 250 years ago, where massacres really were occurring in Australia as recent as 80 years ago in the Northern Territory. A lot of quite large massacres led by police officers with hundreds of people being murdered, innocent people, children. These massacres were occurring in between World War I and World War II, while Aboriginal men were overseas as non-citizens serving for the Australian military. So when you understand these impacts, it naturally sits in your psyche, and it comes out. And so one of the things, I guess, is amnesia. Everybody references the cult of forgetfulness. This was a term sort of bandied around in the 90s by historians and political elites. But what it really means is, for most Australians today, it is a disconnected thought to their contemporary lived experience. While for most Aboriginal people today, except for the likes of Jacinta Price and a few other people that, I won't say any more. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of us, it actually sits with us every day. It's not something that we can relinquish. It's not something that we can let go of. And a part of that probably has to do with, it creates a cognitive dissonance for Aussies. Aussies often think of Australia as a beautiful, wonderful country that champions justice, that champions human rights, that champions the individual should be measured on their merit, not on their skin color or their background, but rather on their merit. And that sort of flies in the face when we get to the subject of Aboriginal people. When we come to there's never been any justice for us. We are the only Indigenous people in the whole of the Commonwealth that don't have a treaty with its colonizer. And so, this morning, for example, when there is that cognitive dissonance, we get young people, young disenfranchised white kids, growing up with racist beliefs. And this morning I was, like many people, on social media, and I noticed open white supremacy. And I'm not talking about a few racist comments that we all see constantly on social media. I'm talking about actual neo-Nazis putting videos online and telling migrants to get out of their country. And I just think that's what happens when you have a disconnected country that doesn't understand itself properly. You get white kids that essentially their ancestors come from another country, telling other people whose ancestors also come from another country, you can't be a part of this. You're changing things too much. And it's like, that shows the lack of self-reflection. That shows the lack of the increased level of entitlement. The terms I heard this morning being used was, Australia is the white man's land. Now, that was interesting. This white supremacist picked that up to talk about, because that was actually the banner or the slogan for our very first law ever made in Australia. And the first law we ever made, of course, was the White Australia Policy in 1901, or its legal name, the Immigration Restriction Act. And so we used to have posters, and you can go to museums and see them, that would picture white people and saying Australia, the white man's land, and obviously there's a cognitive dissonance there because Australia is a black country with a large white migrant population in Southeast Asia. Australia is not in Europe where white people come from. It is not in the Caucasus Mountains where white people get their name from. It is in a black country. That's why all our neighbours are people of colour. And so New Zealanders are aware of this. They've calibrated their understanding that yes, they are a colony. Yes, they have white migrants and colonists that have their descendants there, but they're not in a delusion that they are also on Maori land. And they also have one of the most successful treaties that we've seen as First Nations people, the Treaty of Waitangi. And so the difference when you compare these two countries really is our National Day is about beating people over the head with jingoism and white nationalism and saying, if you want to be Australian, you've got to kind of act like us. And where New Zealand's National Day, and it's also, may I add, it's racially exclusive. It celebrates the arrival of white people usurping the land of black people. Like
Like in New
that's not a
Zealand?
great day. That's not a great day to pick to if you're trying to unify people. And
You're
so
referring to Australia Day?
the
Yeah.
26th of January, yeah.
Right.
So when we look at New Zealand's National Day, their day is the day they signed a treaty together. And that's the day they came together, and that's the day they celebrate. So they have Waitangi Day every day. And also, Kiwis don't seem to be as scared of embracing Maori culture as interchangeably as Pakeha culture. We're here, we're seeing that every time Aboriginal peoples are being friendly, we're welcoming people to lands, we're welcoming people, we're making the effort to be the bigger person. We're saying, hey, you know what? Even though we don't have a treaty, even though these atrocities have happened, even though we incarcerate 100% black kids in the Northern Territory, no white kids get incarcerated, which is Gwangi, which is Naraga, which is Wamba, which is crazy, insane. It is ludicrous. The fact that one state the white kids apparently don't commit crimes in. Like, and I could go to the northern beaches where you are now, and I'm sure you would be able to tell me, kids who have committed crimes. But somehow in the Northern Territory, no one commits crimes if they're white. And all 100% of children that are incarcerated are Indigenous. That tells us we've got a problem. This is not normal. It is 11 times higher in the Northern Territory than in apartheid South Africa. And in the words of Nelson Mandela, thinking of South Africans, he always made it quite clear that poverty, wherever you find poverty, you will find crime. Now, if Aboriginal people, if you understand that there was the frontier wars, and then there's 10% of the Aboriginal population that survived, 90% was killed. So 10% that survived, we are all the descendants of that 10%. So those 10% then became slaves. And then after slavery became indentured servitude, which is another form of slavery. And then that went all the way, different incarnations of that until 1980, until about 1967. And even then we got put on a wage that was still less than white people. It was called the slow workers wage. And that went until 1984. So where would we have ever been able to make wealth? Where would we have ever been able to generate intergenerational wealth when we were making white farmers and white sugarcane farmers in particular the wealthiest sugarcane industry on the planet because they didn't have to pay for wages of South Sea Islanders and Aboriginal people working in the sugarcane plantations. The same thing happened in our cotton industry. So Australia built its money like America did and like many other colonial countries on the backs of other people, and then have kind of victim blamed those people as being negative about not wanting to be part of Team Australia. And it's like, well, how could we be positive? Do you understand that for us, that seems like you're asking, people are sort of just really don't understand Australia's history. So, that's sort of my perception of things. And that's, the space that I teach in to help inform people. And I don't want people to forget our past. I don't want us to feel guilty or horrible about it, but I do want us to recognize we can be a brilliant country, but we must understand ourselves. We must understand the realities of how the colony was built, and it's had a severe, indelible impact on people. And the easiest way, if someone right now is like, "Oh, this guy's very woke," or "He's very blah blah blah," I would just ask that person for a moment to, if they're critical of what I'm saying, is to answer this question for me: what country that has been colonized do the colonizers end up at the bottom and the colonized end up at the top? There is not one on the planet. In what country that's been colonized are the indigenous people doing as well or better than the colonizer? And there's not one on the planet. Every single country that gets colonized, the colonizers end up the wealthy, they end up the powerful political elite, and those that have been colonized end up being the slaves, the indentured servants, the highly incarcerated, and we see that trend around the globe. So it's hard for us to say we would ever be happy with colonization. Of course not. And it's hard for white people to see that something that's given them so much benefit has come at the expense of others.
Crazy answer. I like it. That's just like a mind-blowing revelation for me, to be honest. Like I did
That's
this
great.
at university, like briefly, but um I never saw it from the perspective of like the mindset where you're not integrated with the like that kind of, it's like a black and white dissonance as you described it. How people, you're holding on to obviously the trauma of your what you've experienced and your culture, and then there's like the white people which don't really understand or know what that is like. So it's an interesting contrast that I've never considered before. Um, so in your music and stuff, what type of change do you want to make in the world? Like if you could, and you are.
Look, I think change is sometimes made in small steps, and I think we're seeing it. I've just seen all the ARIA nominations come out this morning, and my sister girl, Emma Donovan, she's got 2 nominations. I see Sister Barker, she's got a bunch. Brother Kobe D's got a bunch. People like Adam Briggs have done a great deal of work for not only him being this sort of breakthrough pioneer, but he also brought people with him, and that's the real skill. Is we all get our moment, but who are you bringing with you? It's best to celebrate with many people, not on your own. And in our culture, unless we're all free, none of us are free. Unless we're all doing well, none of us can celebrate, because we are a collective culture where we care about each other. Generally, that is the cultural value, not always
Yeah.
lived, but that is the belief. So we are making changes. When I see stacks of white kids singing along with blackfella lyrics and feeling connected as human beings, because that's really all we are. We're just other human beings. There's 8 billion of us. We're not that special. But when we're all connecting and we're feeling that human experience, that to me is progress. Think of this, brother. 5, maybe 10 years ago, you probably didn't know what traditional land you lived on. And the school system was meant to teach you and inform you of the real world that you were stepping into. And in reality, they had denied you the real understanding of the land on which you stand on. So we can't rely on the school system. We've never been able to rely on the school system. They want palatable history. They want history that makes us feel good all the time. And that's not possible. So they've scapegoated and said, well, only 3% are going to be upset with it. So we'll just make it let's talk about all the positives and not the negatives. Now, history, we teach history so we don't repeat it. That's the whole premise. That's why we learn about the Holocaust, so we don't repeat things like that. And unfortunately, we're seeing genocidal behavior in the world at the moment, which shows that people have, in the words of Midnight Oil, a short memory. So I think it's important that we look around us and we do see progress. But here's the best part: the progress is actually coming from the artist. It's always been the artist's job to speak truth to power, and it is the artists now that are leading the way. All those tour posters that have the traditional names of different nations, whether it's Mianjin or Gadi of the Gadigal people, or Warrain of the Sydney Cove, or whether it's Nam in Melbourne, or whether it's Lutruwita. Artists have done that. Artists and blackfellas have been doing that work together to educate us where the school system couldn't. So I think I've seen a massive change in the last 5 years. However, the more that decent, normal people embrace the country in which they live in all its aspects, good, bad, and the ugly, we've seen a rise of white supremacy come alongside that. So at the moment, ASIO is spending the lion's share of their budget is being spent on white supremacy terrorism in Australia. And we've seen that. We've seen neo-Nazis, in particular in Victoria. We've seen neo-Nazis gathering, walking down the street, of course, protected by the police, which I think is hilarious. I think it really is a discredit to any police that don't arrest these guys for disturbing the peace and for making violent threats. And the fact that they defend them as a right to free speech, I think, is absolute nonsense. If you should be able to ring the police when you're scared. You shouldn't have to be worried that the police are defending neo-Nazis on the streets and not protecting the other marginalized groups that actually need their protection. So we're seeing change with artists. Artists are speaking out, black, white, everyone else. Everyone's sort of stepping to the forefront. And at the same time, we're still seeing an increase in racism around the country. And I would squarely point the finger in a few directions. One of them would be the rise of Trumpism and extremist opinions being normalized again. The sort of things that people have talked about in the last 5 years really haven't been, or the last, let's say, 6, 7 years, probably weren't as discussed in the last 60 years. We have seen a big swing in racism again. And the other would be Sky News and Fox News and the Murdoch press. And I'll give you a quick example of this. In Queensland, every single paper, not just the main papers, but the regional and local papers, every single one is owned by Rupert Murdoch. And that we used to have rules in Australia about you weren't allowed to have a monopoly on media. So when we get racist rhetoric in one of Murdoch's papers, it goes through the whole of a whole state. There is no alternative voice to counteract that. So that's one issue. And the other would be Murdoch owns Sky News. And we see what comes out of Fox News and Sky News. You know, the idea that Haitians are eating cats on the street, which they're obviously not in America. The idea that everyone who isn't white is a threat to nationalism, is a threat to ideals, which is absolute nonsense. So we're in a weird age where the internet has lifted up lots of good voices, but equally lifted up lots of pretty toxic voices that we've heard from, Nazism a long time ago, and we're seeing it rise again. Again, our job as artists is to call it out, is to speak power to truth, and give people a good time in the meantime. Give people something to have a good night with, as well as maybe learn a little.
Okay, interesting. So with this new song you've released, Amnesia Everybody, what do you think is there anything different about this compared to your previous work?
Yeah, I guess in a songwriting style, I had sung a song called Summer, or written a song called Summer, which was specifically about a massacre from my home country, which was in 1856, called the Towel Creek Massacre. It was one of about 25 major massacres that occurred in the district, and one of, I think, 3 within really close proximity and in a time scale. But that was quite specific. That was a story I was talking specifically to that story and to the elements of what happened historically in that story, because I wanted kids to learn about a massacre that they didn't know about. And I guess where they weren't teaching it in the school, I was going to put it on the radio. This song is more broadly speaking less about the fact that there were massacres, but that people probably don't recognize that 50% of the massacres in Australia were led by police. Now, when you understand that for a non-Indigenous person, that they can call the police and they see help, they see someone who's prepared to help them, that is not the experience for Aboriginal people. That is not bared out in the data. And when you understand our first relationship with police wasn't to get help, our first relationship was they came to kill us. And let's be specific, people like William Wilshire, people like Mounted Constable George Murray, these are the first police inspectors that arrived in the Northern Territory, and they came to kill Aboriginal people. They came from South Australia, from Adelaide, and they went up through the centre, and they rampantly shot hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people over and over and over and over. In places like Queensland, the native mounted police, according to the university, the Cook University in Townsville, the police there, the native mounted police anticipated that they killed roughly around 140,000 people nationwide, and they killed about 70,000 people in Queensland alone. So those are 70,000 Aboriginal people murdered by the native mounted police in that one state. It was an ethnic cleansing of that state before settlers were to move into the territory. So when you realize that's our first experience with police, you can see how difficult it is, a job, to recreate a relationship with police built on trust. Now, in recent times, we've had people like Zachary Rolfe, who was the police officer that shot Kumanjaya Walker, who broke away from the arrest plan, who didn't do what he was meant to do, and he shot him at point blank range. I think he had tweezers or a small set of like eye curlers, and supposedly tried to attempt to stab the police officer. I think I could disarm someone with a pair of eye curlers. Now, if I'd been in the military, which Zachary Rolfe was, and had I been a professionally trained police officer, I think I would be able to use my de-escalation techniques to be able to de-escalate the situation. And I should have followed the arrest plan, which he didn't do. Now, Zachary Rolfe beat the charge. He got off the charge. Every single police officer in Australia that has killed an Aboriginal person has beat the charge. Ever since William Wilshire was the first one who was first charged with murder of an Aboriginal person, that was back in the 1800s, all the way through, that was in the 1900s, all the way through to today, not one police officer ever has been charged with the murder of an Aboriginal person. So it's very hard for us to believe in justice, and the police are there to protect and serve. And it's much more likely for us to believe that the police are there to force compliance upon us, to dominate and bully us. I don't know why they have to have guns in a state like the Northern Territory where we don't have guns in Australia. So why are we not just let the SWAT police, the federal police, the highly elite have guns? We don't need guns in outback communities. And what happens is when people are trained to be hammers, they see everything as nails. And so sometimes people are inclined to shoot rather than de-escalate. We don't see this problem in the white community. We don't see police officers busting into homes in the white community and killing people. It doesn't happen on the same scale, and it happens rampantly in our community. It happens in a lot of black communities where we're not seen as human at the same way that other people are seen. And as a light-skinned black fella, I know myself I'm treated differently. I'm white passing, so I'm treated much better than maybe my brother who's dark-skinned, who was poured into the Cairns police. Cairns police arrested him near Mariba. They brought him into the watching tower. They beat him up in the cells, and that's what his police experience has been.
Okay. Thanks so much for that elaborate answer.
Sorry, I'll keep them
No,
short.
no, I get it. It's so much information that I've never consumed before, so it's interesting. I mean, not interesting. It's just enlightening, I guess. That's probably a good word. So, just discussing your live shows. So you got Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne dates coming up.
Yep.
Any other tours or events that you're excited for?
Yeah. So the October 10th, Brisbane, 11th, Sydney, and the 12th in Naarm in Melbourne at the Cherry Bar. They're going to be great. I'm doing two shows down here next week, solo shows as Jimmy Kyle with the Pretty Littles and the Smith Street Band. Will from Smith Street's a dear friend of mine. We've both got babies at the moment, so he's got Maisie and I've got Leonie. So we love to send ourselves baby photos. We're kind of like nerdy dads, and we sort of talk folk punk and babies, and so that's really exciting. That'll be at Lonnie's nightclub next Friday in I think it's the 5th perhaps in Launceston, and then I'll go down to Hobart, Nipalina, and I'll play at the Hobart Uni Bar with those guys, with the Pretty Littles and Smithies. So that's a lot of fun, and then we will see what the rest of the year holds.
Okay, cool. And when you're on the road, how do you stay in like a clear state of mind?
I don't probably. I don't mind to smoke a doob. Sometimes I have the old medicinal script, so sometimes I'll chill out. I can be a little bit uptight, to be honest. Like sometimes I get a bit stressed out. So I have a lot of responsibilities. So sometimes I'm like, you know what, I'm just gonna chill out and take 5 and take a breath. That's probably like people probably want to hear really healthy answers, like I drink lots of water or I go for a run. I'm sorry, that would be bullshit. If I was to give you lies like that, that's not true. I would probably be looking for a cup of coffee and smoking a doob at the side of the bus.
Great answer.
It's an honest answer, at least. That's at least it's honest.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, any artists that you've been wanting to collaborate? Like you mentioned, like Smith Street Band and stuff. Any artists like that you'd love to collaborate with?
Yeah, actually, there's Smithies. Me and Will. I think I don't know if we've talked about it, but like, who wouldn't want to write a song with Will Wagner? I think he's one of the most brilliant lyricists in the country. He's just prophetic, really, for his. I just think some of the stuff he writes about is and the way in which he writes is incredible. Um, there's a couple of other people that I've had some talks about with my solo work recently. A couple of people that are recently nominated for ARIAs, and we've had some conversations. I won't say who just yet, but we're doing some little solo project stuff together that we'll put out. But I'm just artists that I think are brave. They're the people I tend to go to, and a lot of mob that I respect. Brother Fred Leone. A lot of people here probably won't be familiar with Fred Leone's work, but he recently toured Europe with Xavier Rudd. He's toured quite a lot around Australia. He's a traditional songman and has a beautiful voice when he sings in a Western style, but also sings songs that are literally thousands and thousands of years old. And when you hear people talk about song lines, he's actually one of the guys who knows all that stuff. He's an elder, really, in many regards. Even though he's a younger man, he holds the knowledge of lots and lots of traditional culture. Unlike many people, he has this deep, rich responsibility to maintain these songs. So Fred Leone is an artist. When you hear him sing, the song he is singing is thousands upon thousands upon thousands upon thousands of years old, like eons. And he's like a living museum. If you get a chance to see him perform in your lifetime, do not miss it. He's a time machine. He's a young black fella living in a contemporary world with the knowledge of 65,000 years in his songs, and it's incredible. Absolutely incredible experience.
Wait, what's his name again? Sorry,
Fred Leone.
Fred Leone.
Yeah, so Fred standard spelling, Leone Leone.
Wow.
He's from Butchulla country. He's from Kagari, or what was Fraser Island at one point. Yeah, he's from there. That's where his mob's from, and he's next nephew is Brother Birds, the rapper Birds. You might have heard of Birds before. That's his nephew. His niece is Emily Waramara, who's just been nominated for 2 ARIAs. So Fred's kind of related to like all these other great musicians as well. And we often spend a bit of time together. So that'll be, someone I might do some writing with as well.
Okay, interesting. Um, hmm. So I'm just gonna wrap things up, I think.
Yeah,
But I got
sure.
some other questions to ask.
Go for it.
Um, I'm curious to know, like, as a kind of final question, more on the note of how you take care of yourself, because you mentioned like that you have these hypersensitive issues, and obviously, like, it's a very sensitive issue you're talking about. But like, say as you're writing things, like, how do you like take care of yourself during that process? Because it must be a little bit taxing sometimes to be writing these type of songs.
Yeah, look, it is for sure, and at different points, it's had its impacts. Um, I don't know if I actually have a perfect answer for that. I think I have struggled with it. To be honest, I think it's caused depression at times. It's caused sadness and anger, and you've got to sort of work through that and recalibrate it. I think it's, having my partner's an Aboriginal woman as well. And so having her support and someone that can relate to what I'm talking about and to how I feel. My non Indigenous friends that have been around the journey for a long time, I think, do their best to be great allies and to be understanding and comprehend. And just being there and listening sometimes is enough. But really feeling like someone understands me a little bit with my partner, that definitely that's a strength. That's something that I've really valued. So I don't always have a perfect answer for that sort of stuff. This whole new record is about self reflection and music being a form of therapy, as well as going to therapy and working through my own internal problems, like we all have. Um, yeah, so I've sort of I don't have a pretty answer. I have a sort of like an everyone answer. Like I stumble through and I fall over and I pick myself up and dust myself off, and I think I just go back to values like that are universal values, that it's that all things change, nothing is permanent. Every state changes. Every state of being, you have your good times and your bad times, and that's going to happen. And that I think a lot of peace of mind as well as I get today is having a beautiful son and a beautiful family. And even when times are tough, that makes me happy. That makes my heart full. So that's how I get through things.
Okay, cool. All right, so these are just some fun questions to wrap things up.
Great.
Uh, what is the craziest thing you've ever done? If you had to somehow answer that, I don't know if there's something that comes to mind.
Craziest thing, first thing, probably. Oh, I've done a
Dude,
few weird things. One would have been eating a tarantula. Um, that was pretty wild. Another one was bungee jumping off a platform built on a cliff at the bottom of the Himalayas in Nepal. That was pretty wild. Another one was probably shooting a rocket launcher where I paid the Cambodian military to take me out in the bush, and they gave me their uniform so the rocket residue wouldn't get on me, and I shot a rocket launcher and threw a few grenades with them. Another time, I went to India and I went to the demilitarization zone between Pakistan and India, and that was pretty wild. When I was in Ramallah, which is in Palestine, which is in the West Bank, occupied West Bank. Yeah, spending some time there was pretty hairy and pretty wild too. So I've been to a few weird places and done a few weird things. Yeah, for sure. They're always the fun stories.
I don't think
And,
I'll ever.
and I recommend you eat the crickets. Don't eat the tarantula. The tarantula is not as delicious as it sounds.
I actually ate a spider in Cambodia, so we
There
have
we
some sort of
go.
connection.
Yeah, my bro, you get it. And it's messed up that you think, I'm going to eat this shit. I'm going to do it. like there's perfectly good food everywhere, and you're like, I want to find out what it's like. Did you eat the thorax part, or did you eat the fangs part, or did you just go for the legs? What did you
It
do?
was just the legs.
Yeah.
The
Yeah, the
legs.
legs are the legs. You start with the legs, but looking at the face of the spider with its teeth, I was like,
Okay, what? Oh, actually, we already know the answer to this. What is one topic you can talk about for hours?
there you go. We already know that answer. Yep.
Uh, what is the thing you like most about yourself? Quick
Oh,
answer.
quick answer. I'm a person that wears my heart on my sleeve, and I'm a person that is a pretty vulnerable person. Like I will talk about things that probably other people might be reluctant to, and I feel that gives permission for other people to be themselves and for them to be vulnerable as well. And I think over the years I've realized that vulnerability is a superpower, not a weakness. And yeah, I probably had to learn that, but that's always just being myself.
Okay. All right. What is your favorite album? If you had to pick one, or a highlight favorite album?
Favorite album of someone else's of all time, kind of thing.
Yeah. What? Yeah.
Cool. I would say like the first thing that pops in my head, and I'm not necessarily sure it is, but the first thing that pops in my head is Neon Ballroom is probably one of the albums by Silverchair that I think is still like quite an incredible album. Songs like big 6 minute songs that have multiple changes in them that have massive legacy, and yeah, I still think that's a ripping album.
What about your favorite artist?
Oh, tough one. Favorite artist? Uh, I don't know actually. I don't know if I have a favorite artist. I had a favorite song for many years, which is only because you get these nostalgic connections to songs. For a lot of years, my favorite artist was Sepultura. You would probably not have picked that. And my favorite song for many years was November Rain by Guns N' Roses. And I think it's because when I was little, I just heard it a lot, and it just sort of sat in my psyche.
Yeah, fair enough. Do you have a favorite movie?
Or probably Jaws. It was one when I was younger. I really loved Jaws. I think I watched Terminator 2 on cassette on VHS as a kid over and over and over and over and over again. But I'm obsessed with horror films. I always have been. I'm a massive James Wan and Lee Wan-L fan. So the guys who did Saw, that did The Conjuring, that sort of whole, two Australian dudes that make exceptional horror films, and are massive all around the world for it. So
Are they Australian, the guys that made Saw?
yeah,
Or
so Lee Warnell was on Recovery, which used to be like a show that came on after Rage when we were real young. It was like a morning music sort of show. And he was the host on that. And then James Wan was, I think, a Malaysian born migrant to Australia, Chinese Malay born there, raised here. And those two teamed up and in Melbourne, I think. And the rest is history. So that's why when you hear James Wan, he's got a Aussie accent still, and even though he lives over there, and Lee Warnell often, even if he doesn't even if he doesn't write the films now, often does a cameo performance in the film. So they've both done, they'd have to have close to 20 films by now between the two of them.
yeah, interesting. Okay, I've got two more questions. Favorite place to visit in the world? If
I have two. I have two. So one of them is Varanasi, which is in India, and it's where the Ganges, the Mother Ganga, the river, it flows around the oldest lived-in city on human existence, and uh, they burn the bodies of human beings there. They dip them in the water and then they burn them in front of you, and it's a very, very spiritual place. It's like nothing I'd ever seen. And the next closest to that and gave me the same feeling was Uluru. Uluru is, if you've never been to Uluru, it is deceptively much, much larger than you could ever imagine. And because in every photo there's nothing to scale it, you just can't believe how gigantic it is and what an impression it makes until you see it in the flesh. So they're my
Cool.
two spiritual places.
Nice. Okay. And last question, do you have a favorite venue to play?
Oh, favorite venue. Or I think maybe the Corner Hotel in Richmond in Nam is probably one of my favorite venues to play. There is this one beam that stands like in the middle and it gives me the shits. But other than that, it is brilliant. And yeah, it's such a great venue. It's got so much history in it, and when it's full, it's a real good time.
Okay, awesome. Well, that was quite an incredible conversation. I learned so much, and
Thanks,
yeah,
Dan.
I really appreciate your time and your knowledge.
My pleasure. Have a great day.
Yeah, same to you.
Thanks, Balu.